Have you ever walked into a room and completely forgotten why you went there? Maybe you've torn the house apart looking for your glasses, only to realize they've been sitting on top of your head the whole time. Or maybe you've stood frozen in the grocery aisle, staring at the shelves, unable to remember the one thing you came for. If you're over 50, you've probably laughed at yourself when this happens. And yes, sometimes it's perfectly normal. Our brains change as we age. Processing speed slows a bit, recall takes longer, and names don't roll off the tongue as easily as they used to. That's the natural rhythm of life. But here's what most people don't realize. Not every lapse is harmless. Some of those little slips are whispers of something far more serious. And the tragedy I've seen over decades of treating patients is that people shrug it off. They say, "I'm just getting older." And by the time they recognize it's more than that, precious time has already been lost. Your brain is the seat of your identity. It holds your stories, your wisdom, your love. Losing it piece by piece is one of the deepest fears we all carry. But here's the hopeful truth. When you know what to look for, when you recognize the early signs, you can act. You can get treatment, you can protect your brain, and you can keep living your story with clarity. Today, on Senior Health After 50, we're going to dive deep into the early signs of memory loss you cannot afford to ignore. I'll show you how to separate normal forgetfulness from true red flags and what you can do starting today to defend your brain. Along the way, you'll hear stories not just from my patients, but from history and from world figures we all recognize that reveal the real, human side of brain health after 50. By the end of this video, you'll see that memory loss does not have to mean inevitable decline. With vigilance, wisdom, and the right care, it can be slowed, managed, and in many cases, prevented. And if you find value in this journey, I'd love for you to be part of our community. Please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone you care about, leave a comment with your own story, and subscribe to Senior Health After 50, because together, we can keep those whispers from turning into silence. Early red flags. What's normal, what's not? Let's talk honestly about memory. Forgetting a name and then remembering it an hour later, that's normal. Losing track of where you parked in a huge mall and then finding it after a few minutes, that's normal too. But forgetting how to drive home on a street you've traveled every day for 20 years, that's not just aging, that's a warning. In my years as a physician, I've learned to separate the harmless slip-ups from the red flags that deserve serious attention. These are the early signs families need to watch for. 1. Getting lost in familiar places. If your spouse suddenly can't find their way around the neighborhood they've lived in for decades, it's not just forgetfulness. That's a red flag. I once had a patient, a retired postman, who suddenly couldn't find his way back to the very street he had walked every single day of his career. His wife knew immediately this wasn't just old age. 2. Difficulty with daily tasks. A retired chef once told me he couldn't follow the same recipe he'd perfected over 40 years. He wasn't simply misplacing ingredients, he was losing the sequence altogether. That wasn't a kitchen mistake, it was the beginning of cognitive decline. 3. Trouble with language. Everyone loses words, sometimes it's part of life. But when common words are replaced with strange substitutes, or when a person constantly loses track of a conversation, that's concerning. One of my patients began calling a watch a hand clock and couldn't recall the right word even after being reminded. Those subtle shifts are often the brain's early cry for help. 4. Repeating questions. I'll never forget the daughter who came into my clinic in tears. Her father asked her, "What day is it?" 5 times in 1 hour. Each time, she answered gently, but he couldn't retain it. That kind of loop is not normal aging. It's a sign that memory circuits are breaking down. 5. Changes in personality or mood. When a gentle, easygoing woman suddenly becomes irritable, suspicious, or even paranoid, families often think she's just getting cranky with age. But mood and personality shifts are sometimes the earliest signs of dementia. And then there's one of the most powerful examples in modern history, President Ronald Reagan. After leaving the White House, he revealed in a heartfelt letter to the American people that he had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. His openness was groundbreaking. It reduced stigma and opened conversation worldwide. But if you look back, the early signs had been there: repetition, memory lapses, and moments of disconnect. At the time, people dismissed them as stress or aging. Only in hindsight did the world recognize them for what they were: the first whispers of Alzheimer's. Even world leaders with sharp minds and access to the best medical care are not immune. And that's the lesson for all of us. When the brain begins to change, the signs may be subtle, but they should never be ignored. Not always Alzheimer's, when memory loss has another cause. Here's a truth I wish more families understood. Not every case of memory loss is Alzheimer's. In fact, some of the most dramatic cases of confusion I've treated were completely reversible. Yes, you heard that right. What looked like the beginning of dementia turned out to be something that could be treated, even cured. 1. Infections. I once had an 82-year-old patient whose daughter rushed her into the ER, convinced she had suddenly developed Alzheimer's overnight. The woman didn't recognize her own home, kept asking where her late husband was, and couldn't follow a simple conversation. But after running tests, we found the real culprit, a urinary tract infection. With antibiotics, her mind cleared within days. It wasn't dementia, it was delirium caused by infection. 2. Medications. Many seniors take multiple prescriptions, blood pressure pills, pain relievers, sleep aids. What families don't realize is that the side effects of these medications, especially when mixed, can cloud memory and mimic dementia. I recall a retired school principal who thought he was losing his mind. We reviewed his list of medications and found 3 that were interfering with his memory. Once his prescriptions were adjusted, the fog lifted. 3. Thyroid disorders. A sluggish thyroid can cause forgetfulness, brain fog, even depression. One of my patients, a vibrant grandmother, was heartbroken because she couldn't keep up with conversations at family gatherings. A simple blood test revealed hypothyroidism. With treatment, her sharpness came back, and so did her confidence. 4. Vitamin deficiencies. Low vitamin B12 is notorious for causing memory issues. I once treated a retired pilot who feared he had early dementia. He was devastated. His identity was built around precision and sharpness. But after lab tests showed B12 deficiency, we began supplementation. Within weeks, his energy and focus returned. 5. Depression. This one surprises many families. Seniors with untreated depression can look like they have dementia. They lose interest in activities, withdraw from loved ones, and appear forgetful. We call it pseudo-dementia. I had a widowed patient who thought he was slipping into Alzheimer's. In reality, his memory problems stem from deep grief and untreated depression. Therapy and medication gave him a second chance at joy. And we can't forget the stories of public figures. Winston Churchill, for example, openly spoke of his black dog of depression. At times, people around him noticed his distraction and fatigue, but it wasn't dementia. It was the crushing weight of untreated depression. His story reminds us that even the sharpest minds can appear impaired when emotional health is neglected. Or take Glenn Campbell, the legendary country singer. His Alzheimer's diagnosis was real, but his willingness to keep performing while his memory faded helped millions understand the blurred line between ordinary forgetfulness, depression, and true dementia. His courage showed that even in decline, there is dignity and purpose, but it also taught us that early evaluation matters. The lesson here is simple. Memory problems don't always equal Alzheimer's. Sometimes the brain is crying out for something we can actually fix: hydration, vitamins, infection treatment, medication adjustments, emotional support. That's why I tell every family, don't jump to conclusions. Get tested, get answers. Because sometimes the problem isn't permanent and the solution is closer than you think. Protecting brain health: how to keep your mind sharp after 50. Here's the good news. While we can't stop aging, we can absolutely influence how our brains age. Over the years, I've seen patients in their 80s and 90s still sharp as a tack, while others began struggling in their 60s. The difference wasn't luck, it was lifestyle. Science is clear. The choices you make every day can either protect your brain or speed up its decline. 1. Eat for your brain. There's a saying in medicine, what's good for the heart is good for the brain. The Mediterranean diet is the gold standard. Olive oil, fresh vegetables, berries, nuts, beans, and fish like salmon. These foods fight inflammation, protect blood vessels, and keep the brain fueled. I often think of the people of Okinawa, Japan, one of the blue zones, where residents live longer and healthier than almost anywhere else on Earth. Their diets are rich in vegetables, tofu, and fish. and dementia rates there are dramatically lower. That's no coincidence. 2. Move your body. Exercise is medicine for the mind. It boosts blood flow to the brain, lowers risk of stroke, and even stimulates the growth of new neurons. I had a patient in his 70s, a retired firefighter, who took up daily walking after a mild stroke. Within months, his memory improved along with his balance. He told me, "Doc, I thought I was too old to start, but moving every day gave me my mind back." And let's not forget powerful examples. Look at Jane Fonda. Well into her 80s, she credits regular exercise with keeping her sharp and active, not just physically, but mentally. She proves age doesn't have to mean decline. 3. Challenge your brain. Your brain is like a muscle. If you don't use it, you lose it. Learn a language, play an instrument, read books, or even do crossword puzzles. I remember a woman in her late 70s who decided to learn the piano. Not only did her memory improve, but her sense of joy skyrocketed. She told me, "I feel young again every time I sit at the keys." Even world leaders understand this. Winston Churchill, despite his battles with depression, famously painted as a hobby. He said it calmed his mind and sharpened his focus. That creative outlet was his brain's therapy. 4. Stay socially connected. Loneliness is toxic to the brain. Isolation increases the risk of dementia as much as smoking does for the lungs. On the flip side, staying socially engaged protects memory. One of my patients, a widower, joined a local seniors choir. The music, the laughter, the friendships, it transformed his mood and memory. He said, "I didn't just find my voice, I found my mind again." And think about the Dalai Lama, still sharp and thoughtful well into his 80s. He has often emphasized community, compassion, and connection as keys to longevity. Science backs him up. Social connection is one of the most powerful brain protectors we have. 5. Protect your sleep. Sleep is when the brain cleans itself. During deep sleep, toxins linked to Alzheimer's are flushed out. Skip sleep too often, and those toxins build up. One businessman I treated bragged about running on 4 hours of sleep. By his late 60s, he was facing memory lapses that scared him. Only when he took sleep seriously, setting routines, limiting screens, treating sleep apnea, did his memory stabilize. Even leaders like Jeff Bezos have spoken about protecting sleep as one of their most important decisions. It's not laziness, it's brain maintenance. The message here is simple. You are not powerless. Every bite you take, every step you walk, every conversation you share is either feeding your brain or starving it. I've seen patients transform their memory by making small, consistent changes. Your brain is your most valuable possession. Treat it like treasure, and it will serve you well for decades to come. Aging is not about surrendering to decline, it's about paying attention. Your body doesn't always shout. Most of the time, it whispers. Shortness of breath, confusion, sadness, forgetfulness, these aren't just old age, they're messages. And if you honor those messages, you give yourself more years of clarity, more years of connection, and more years of life lived with dignity. So here's the lesson I want you to carry with you. Never ignore the small changes. Write them down. Share them with your doctor. Ask the questions. Because the greatest tragedy isn't growing old. The tragedy is losing the chance to keep living fully, simply because we chose not to listen. If this video spoke to you, I invite you to be part of our growing community here at Senior Health After 50. Please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone you care about, leave a comment with your own story, and subscribe for more wisdom, more science, and more hope. Together, we can build a community that listens, learns, and thrives one whisper at a time.